Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 171, and we're going to talk about my pedagogy, WW3, and Tulsi Gabbard. What's pedagogy? Pedagogy is basically the method of teaching. I presented a paper once at an academic conference about my pedagogy, and at the end of it, the moderator of my session just kind of looked at me and said, "Yeah, that's not what we do." I'm sorry. It was kind of funny because even the people who were attending that session were kind of interested, but it wasn't the direction. It wasn't something that academicians who are in power, the gatekeepers of information, they didn't want students to know how to dissect information and try to find alternative, information. That's not what pedagogy is supposed to be about these days, apparently. So, if you've been listening to the last few episodes, you know that I use deconstruction, which is from the whole postmodernist approach for understanding subjectivity. And regardless of what other people may say about it, it is extremely useful, especially when you want to try to figure out if someone is being truthful, if this is the best option that you have, and where can I find alternate ideas, alternate choices that might actually be better for me. Well, I do it primarily because of the way that I was raised. My father was a pastor, but he was also a philosophy PhD, not a degree mill PhD, but a legit PhD. In fact, he tried to pick the most difficult topic that he could in philosophy. And he decided that he was going to start with the main influence of Immanuel Kant. And if you know anything about continental philosophy, then you know that we're getting into kind of deep stuff here. And what was so challenging about it was that this writer that he decided that he was going to research was so obscure that none of his stuff was translated to English. And so here you have this guy who grew up in Korea, came to study in the United States, now going to devote all of his time and effort on reading material that was written in Old German, right? So it wasn't even the kind of printing that we see today, where the printing is, the letters are easy to read, but it's old style printing as well. So it's the fancy, very fancy writing. It's these days you only see it when you do calligraphy, but that's what it was all in, because it was from what, over 200 years ago this guy wrote. And so anything that he did write, it was in that kind of typesetting. So it was challenging on many different levels. Plus, it was also during the time before the internet. And so he actually had to travel to Europe to do some of his research. Anyway, so the point being that being a child, being the child of a person like that, has its challenges. So he's an intellectual giant. And on the other hand, he's a religious freakazoid. So, as a young person struggling with my own identity issues and lots of questions, I didn't learn anything at church because everything was in the Korean language. And anything that I did have understand came from our at-home discussions. And eventually those discussions became arguments, at least from my point of view. My dad would always say, "We're having discussions." And I'm like, okay, passionate discussions then. But at some point in my life in high school, I decided that I really wanted to cut loose. I really wanted to be a bad person, explore all the, bad things that all the bad boys do, because I was sick of being bullied and being picked on and all that other kind of stuff. So I decided that I was going to try to, that the goal was to defeat my father in an argument. And once I did that, then it would be the signal that I have reached the point where I can be myself. I can live on my own, be an individual. And so I would, basically try to get him to agree with something that I said. And honestly, looking back, he ran rings around me. My level of thinking was so low. It's pretty embarrassing. But all of that, the attempt to try to challenge, the attempt to try to undermine and disprove whatever it is my dad was saying, laid the groundwork, the foundation for the way that I think. So when I would go to school and I would listen to teachers, after talking with my dad, listening to a lot of these teachers, it was it wasn't very challenging at all. And then when I went to grad school, that's how I was, and I said this in my previous one of my previous episodes, that this is how I was able to survive, right? I, would deconstruct, literally analyze all of the information that my professors were giving me, and that's how I was able to preserve at least, some sort of integrity with what I believed. At the same time, use some of the methods and some of the ideas that I was learning to get at more information that I was concerned with, not necessarily continental philosophy. So my whole pedagogical approach started coming together when I had to start teaching classes at Temple. Actually, it started when I was teaching youth group at church, and that started back in '87. And so, I noticed that the same questions, the same challenges, the same behavior patterns kept recurring. And so, one time I would try to answer questions this way, it didn't turn out right. And so I would try a different approach, and so on and so forth. And so that process of trying to figure out what would be the best reply, what would be the best position to take when in a discussion, that became my whole knowledge production approach. And what that is basically, if we were to review the first 6 episodes of this channel, covers this idea of knowledge production. But basically, each of us, we look at the world from our own subjectivity. Even blind people will perceive and experience the world from their subjective position. Each person, depending on their age, their circumstance, all the cultural factors, all these factors, the time period in which they live, they will have their own unique subjectivity. And so their understanding of what is true and what is not will be unique to that person. Even twins, I would argue, in the same family, raised in the same way, will have slightly different subjectivities. They're going to be unique because they are individuals. So what we see, what we perceive, what we experience is true to that person, not necessarily to others, but to that person. And so we make knowledge, we construct arguments, we say things to try to persuade other people to see the things in the way that we do. That's politics, right? And so if you look up politics in the dictionary, it says that politics is the strategy of gaining position or power. I call it the art of persuasion. If you can persuade a lot of people to see things your way, then you gain power. You establish a higher position among your friends, right? You become the go-to person because you are able to persuade people to see things your way. Your solutions work as long as you see things your way. And so therefore you gain positions of power. So this explains the difference of opinion. Everyone is fighting for those positions of power. And so now you have multiple subjectivities. This is why, excuse me, it's difficult for alphas to get along with each other, right? If you're an alpha male or an alpha female, it's very difficult. Or in my case, I married an alpha female. I'm pretty sure, right? And I'm more kind of a understated leader, maybe a small a alpha. Well, our heads butt a lot, and so it requires a lot of politicking in order to get through and make certain decisions. But it has its advantages as well. But in any case, there's multiple subjectivities. Everyone has their opinion. And this was made clear when I would teach race class. Everyone had their own understanding of race. So, in a situation where everyone has their own subjectivity, their own opinion, how do you have a discussion? I mean, it's very easy for it to devolve into this is what I think, and this is what I think, and people are not listening to what other people are saying because they're clearly wrong from their subjectivity. So it becomes less of a matter of what is right or what is wrong, especially when you realize that if you agree to someone else's position, there are profits and losses. You lose because now your subjectivity is invalidated, and you validate someone else's, and so they gain in terms of power, position, cultural capital, etc. So my pedagogical approach was, okay, let's not have to decide whose subjectivity is better, but let's try to find a better subjectivity where everyone gets to come to the table and everyone is treated in the same way. We don't, just like many other race classes did, say this is the official definition. And so if it benefits you, awesome. If it doesn't benefit you, well, you're just a racist anyway, so it doesn't matter. And so people used to tell me that they enjoyed my class because no one had an arbitrary advantage over anyone else. So my whole thing was, okay, we all have our own unique subjectivities. How can we establish a subjectivity where all of us are now more or less have skin in the game? Okay, so is there a better subjectivity out there from which we can then have a discussion? It's not about right or wrong. It's about trying to get more information, right? And so my pedagogical approach was not about validating anyone's subjectivity, but eventually, and you may remember, I say that a problem is when you run out of knowledge. That's why it's a problem. You ran out of information to either understand what's going on or even propose a solution to the situation that you perceive as a problem. So the key to education, the key to this whole learning process is how to get better information, more information than what I already think is all that I need to know. Okay. And so to get beyond, here's the question, here's the answer. When you hear this question, here's the answer. That kind of memorization, boring, that kind of education which kills interest, research, curiosity, or even basic thinking, right? So we want to sort of transcend that, get beyond that, and say, okay, well, this is what I was taught. Well, how legit is that information? Is there anything else? Also, in this process, you get to try to figure out, well, if I believe you, who benefits, who loses, what is to be gained. If you do this, right, if you start adopting this process, which I've been talking about over the last 170 episodes, if you do that, it's very difficult to listen to any speech or any lecture without having questions. Now, the benefit of this, so that's the tool that you now have. The benefit is now you can de-escalate situations, right? So instead of trying to, obviously seeing that if someone else gets their way, you are going to suffer greatly. You're going to lose a lot, cultural capital and actual value. You see it. So instead of you doubling down on your position, trying to get more allies for your position, you can de-escalate by searching for a better solution, a solution which works out better for everyone involved, at least in that room, in that particular moment. And on a greater social scale, more people will benefit. You don't have to have this debate. You don't have to start screaming at each other. You don't have to become a Karen. You don't have to be that person who calls everyone a racist, right? Now you can offer an alternative which will make everyone there happier. That's de-escalation. De-escalation is not compromise, right? I hate compromise, right? Where you have to give up something of yours and they have to give up something of yours, because no one ever really does that. And so you want to have a de-escalation where everyone involved benefits. It's sort of like the basic free market transaction where you purchase something because you believe what you're buying is worth more than the currency you're giving that person, right? And it goes the other way too. They believe that the currency you're giving them is worth more than what they are selling. And so both parties, both people, or everyone involved has to believe that they are benefiting from that de-escalation proposal, right? That alternative proposal. And so this is the way that I used to teach. And a lot of people kind of really liked that they didn't have to fight, they didn't have to get angry. And plus, you don't have to be embarrassed by admitting that you misunderstood something or realized that you had a weaker position. You don't, you cut out all of this negative emotion. And so I would, whenever I'm in a conversation, I always sit and let other people talk and get my bearings on where everyone else is, get into the heads of everybody else. And so then I know what to say, how to say it, and when in a pickle, find better solutions. Now, why am I talking about this pedagogy? Well, because more and more people are talking about how the United States is already at war with, at least with Russia. And the war in Israel, ultimately because Russia backs Iran. So we can be at war with Russia that way. And then with Ukraine, it was a proxy war with Russia. And so we can see that it's a war that way as well. And so some people have been saying we've already been at war and you can invoke proxy war. But think about it, all of the weapons and the money that the Ukraine is receiving, all of it comes from the United States. I mean, 99% of it comes from, okay, 95% of it comes from the United States. And if you were to say, well, no, NATO is providing some of that as well. Well, 90% of NATO's budget, right, give or take a few percent, is from the United States. And so basically, NATO is the United States. There was a recent offensive in Kursk, around Kursk in Russia. And even though Ukraine is losing everywhere else, they have an incursion here at Kursk. Apparently, all of it is fueled by NATO weapons and NATO money, AKA the United States money. But all of this war rhetoric is going around. We're inching closer to World War III, open World War III. Who's in charge? I might have mentioned before that had Trump been assassinated, then we would openly be in World War III. Just look at the chain of events that happened after the failed assassination attempt. Most of those things, if not all, require months of planning, months. And so, but just imagine for a moment that Trump, in fact, did, become unalive. Okay, then all of everything that happened after would have made sense, right? The mass media would have pushed a certain line saying, oh no, we have to go after Russia, right? And so we would be openly at war. And of course, China would be dragged into it because they probably would make a move against Taiwan. And so the US will try to go that way too. And that's why I had a lot of military themed episodes recently, because I saw all of this, all of these pieces in operation. So who's in charge? Who's at the helm? Definitely not Sleepy Joe. I mean, he can barely know where he is at any given time. Any interview he gives online and is heavily edited. And definitely not Wine Mom, or AKA Kamala Harris, right? She's too drunk, or at least that's what a lot of people are saying these days, is that she's constantly intoxicated. She's not in charge of anything. And when it came time to announce that, troop movements, it was Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Lloyd Austin seems to be the person in charge of the military, not the president of the United States. Arguably, too, when Trump was in office, everything that he wanted to have happen in the military, or most of it, they didn't tolerate, they didn't like it. And so people started to lie to him. You had that phone call between General Milley and someone in Russia saying, or China, like saying basically, if he had made an order, I wouldn't have followed it anyway, right? So clearly the president is not the one in charge, no matter what. So this is very disturbing. We're moving towards open World War III, which means rationing and all this other kind of stuff going on. It's what Gerald Celente always says: when all else fails, they take you to war. And clearly, since everything is falling apart, the wheels are coming off the bus, right? They're taking us to war. They're rushing it, in fact, even. And so that's why I believe, anyway, they chose Harris, because clearly she is just a puppet, a sock puppet among puppets, right? And because she won't have a single thought of her own, she'll just simply do what she is told. She'll just say what she's told to say. Now, keeping with the Harris theme, Tulsi Gabbard comes to mind as well. Tulsi Gabbard was the individual who knocked out Harris from the 2020 election, right, in a debate. She destroyed her. If you YouTube that Harris Gabbard debate moment, then you'll see it. It's an incredible takedown. Well, she used to be in the House of Representatives representing Hawaii. She was vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. And while she was vice chair, she resigned. She undemocratic, became an independent, right? Left the Democratic Party. She was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. She's American Samoan, right? So she's been over to the Middle East, not unlike Waltz, right? So I mean, she's BA, right? She's total, badass person. By the way, Lieutenant Colonel, that rank is extremely significant. They say that that is the last non-political rank in the military. That if you become a full bird colonel, that's when you begin to see a lot of shenanigans, right? Or a lot of politicking. And so people who don't play the game, who don't go along with what superiors are saying, they don't get the promotion to colonel. That's what I heard. I forget who told me that, but all of the people that I like who were former military, they are lieutenant colonels, right? Retired. Douglas McGregor, he's lieutenant colonel as well. So anyway, it took a lot of courage on her part to become independent, and she's paying the price. I don't know if you saw the news where Obama put her on the terrorist watch list for knocking Harris out of the race. I am extremely surprised that Tulsi Gabbard was not picked up by someone as a VP pick. I mean, she's perfect, right? As a VP pick, and she's not a weak person in any shape of any in anyone's imagination. I saw one podcast that where she did an interview. I forget who it was. Part of the interview process is for her to carry a big rock up a mountain, and she did it, right? Not everyone can do that. So I think that's I give props to her for that. So if Trump is bringing her on to help him with the debate against Harris, I'm hoping it gives me hope, right? So I'm hoping that it means that he learned his lesson, that he'll go over the heads of some of his advisors and pick the people that he needs to have as part of his presidential run and hopefully his election, that he will pick qualified people. He will pick people who will enable him not to repeat the mistakes that he made his last term, right? In other words, he's got to have solid people for health, for medicine, for military, for foreign affairs, all of these. If he picks the right people, man, he could go down in history as having one of the most significant watershed presidencies there ever was, especially since we're on the brink of World War III. My only negative comment is that we are also on the brink of an economic meltdown. There's going to be a lot of pain, and a lot of people are going to use that against the next president, whoever it is. And if it is Trump, I just hope that he's like Javier Milei and he just slashes all of the government spending, gets rid of all of those fluffy, puffy, soft, wasteful government jobs. And if he does that, he could bring the country back from the brink, because Harris and Waltz are not going to be doing this. And hopefully there'll be some justice in the process, justice not just for Trump, but for the American people. A guy can hope, you know what I mean? That's it for this episode. I will talk to you tomorrow.